Hello and welcome back to A Boring Revolution, your number one news source for everything in regards to the Boring Company. My name is Will. I come back with another episode today. So about 3 or 4 days ago, I was just basically on Discord, and quite a lot going on at Discord at the moment. If you'd like to join, the link is down below. But one of the members on the channel, Cunningham, actually linked me in on a document from the Baltimore to Washington DC loop, which has been proposed quite a while back, and not much really has been said about it. Very little has changed on the Boring Company website. There's not been very much in the news about this particular project, and I have almost totally forgotten about this project. It's in the back of my mind. I know potentially they want to do it. I kind of got the impression that it was basically too big for the Boring Company to complete at this particular moment in time, with the Boring Company being still a startup. We're still a startup. There's less than 30 people that work for the Boring Company. But it's clear to me now that I have totally neglected this particular project, because there's a lot going on in the background. The Boring Company are definitely not stagnant, far from stagnant. They are clearly very active, trying to push this project forward. In my quarterly review that I did 4 days ago, I had it down as, you know, they're thinking about it, it's under consideration. But I think now, really, this is a project that's going through the planning process and could very well get approved pretty quickly. So I decided that I would have a go at trying to read this insane document, all 505 pages of it, and try and get a better understanding of what's going on with this project, how they're going to build it, where exactly they're going to put things, you know, what methods are they going to use to construct it, and in fact quite a lot of very interesting details are in this document. You've just got to find it. There is a lot of fluff in there. There's a lot of things that are basically just copy and pasted from regulations and local laws and as such environmental considerations. A lot of it is basically shite, to be frank with you, but there are some very important things in there. The Boring Company project in Baltimore, Washington DC is going to benefit the environment. It's not going to detract from it. So the fact that they have to do an environmental assessment to approve something that is going to make the environment cleaner and safer is kind of, for me personally, is kind of ironic. So I went through and I made some notes. So I thought we'd go through that today, and we could talk about all the things that we've learned from this document. And I'd say at least 80% of the document is just rubbish, but if you look carefully, you can find the gems in there. So Washington DC, the capital of the USA, to Baltimore, which is a route of around 35 to 36 miles. Let's just have a look at the project scope. We've got a dual artery tunnel that's 14 foot in diameter. The internal diameter is 12 foot. The route length is, this is an approximate, obviously, because it could slightly change, 53.3 miles. Most of that is going under Route 295, which is the main motorway linking those two places. We have 4 launch pits. They keep mentioning there's going to be 4 launch pits. However, they have this kind of backup / maybe extra launch pit or launch shaft, which they call Pit E, which is quite reasonably close to the proposed loop station at Washington. We've also got 70 ventilation shafts. These will be around 24 foot in diameter. They might be slightly less. They mentioned 12 to 24 foot. Obviously depends on what they're going to exactly use there. They're going to be approximately 0.5 miles apart, although they do mention that they could be up to 2 miles apart, but that is a long distance if they're going to be used as escape routes as well. So I'm a bit unsure as whether that is actually a good idea to space them out so far apart. The proposal at the moment, and the key word is moment, is 2 underground stations. One of those is at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, and the other one is at 55 New York Avenue in Washington. So the Oriole Park is the one in Baltimore. Right in between, there's 2 stadiums there. I believe one's a football stadium and one is a baseball stadium, I think. They're proposing using AEVs, or autonomous electric vehicles, which will be based on a modified Model X. The journey will take approximately 15 minutes. Top speed they have as 150 miles per hour. I've got the value of this project around $890 million. There's no mention in this document whatsoever, and I've looked quite substantially, as to how they're going to pay for it or how much it's going to cost. That is my own estimate. However, you'd imagine that they could maybe finance that privately, but again, we'll have to find out. They give some very, very wide timelines in terms of constructing various parts of this project. So the actual entire project, they have taken 5 to 23 months, which is, it's like near enough 70% difference between 15 months and 23. There's quite a big distance in terms of there's a wide margin there. And they say the actual tunnelling element could be anything from 12 to 20 months. They also mention using lots and lots of different TBMs, 8 to 16 TBMs. Again, there's a lot of difference there. Well, why do you need 16 TBMs? Why not 8? Anyway, let's get into the details. Like I keep saying, there's a lot of rubbish in this document. Some very, very strange kind of regulations and specific things that it asks of you. But I'm guessing that's how you guys do it in the USA. There's even one part asking about how this might impact ethnic minorities or people of low income, and it's just, I find that a very strange thing to signal out ethnic minorities like that, when really we should be looking at how it affects anyone, from people who are on low incomes to people who are multimillionaires. It shouldn't really matter. If it's going to affect you to the detriment of your health or to the detriment of your well-being, then that should be considered. It shouldn't really matter if you're black, Chinese, Korean, Pacific Islander, European. It shouldn't really matter at all. Anyway, the loop system is designed as such that it can be easily extended at a later date. They plan to add more stations in between Washington and Baltimore, which I will point out later on. But this actual environmental draft report does not take into consideration adding extra micro stations along the route. That will be considered in a separate document or a separate report. The Hyperloop, so they talk about the Hyperloop, but it's kind of like not really anything to do with potentially converting it. They say the potential future use of Hyperloop technology is currently unknown, basically saying, well, we don't really think it's going to be used for Hyperloop, which I was quite surprised to read. They describe the system as point-to-point with entry/exit points at each terminus. There are only 2 terminuses, one in Baltimore near the main stadiums there, and one in Washington. Refers to feeder tunnels as spurs and offshoots. A TBM launch shafts will be converted into, this is an interesting one actually, into maintenance terminals for AEV charging and repairs. So that is a question that I've raised in the past, is where are these vehicles going to be charged? And the plan is that these actual launch pits where they will launch the TBM, once construction has been completed, they will then convert them into a 2-story structure within which they will have elevators, and then they'll have like a maintenance area and a recharging area where they can do the various tasks they need to complete on these pods. And it's, again, that's confirmed, I've already really said that. Additional environmental assessment confirms the tunnels will contain walkway, lighting systems, video systems, and marking systems. I'm unsure what exactly they mean by markings systems or marking system. I wonder if that's to do with the autonomy of the vehicle. Doesn't really say. Riders will access a loop by either boarding the AEV at the surface or boarding below ground via an escalator. We kind of already knew that. They have some renders in the document, which I'll show you in a minute, which kind of collaborate what they're saying here. The launch shafts are 45 foot deep and range from 5.5 to 17.3 acres. 1 acre is approximately 64 meters by 64 meters, just to give you sort of an example of how big 1 acre is. So it'd be 5.5 times 64, and whatever that comes out, it'd be that times that, basically. So launch shafts, notes the tunnel could be 30 to 90 foot below ground level depending on surface topography. So obviously if you've got hills or mountains along the way, you probably won't have a mountain, but you might have some changes in topography. Obviously the crown of the tunnel is going to be further underground than at some other points in the system. System would operate up to 20 hours. Very interesting thing they say here. Would operate up to 20 hours per day, although it says that is not yet determined. So you wonder what they're going to be doing for the other 4 hours, probably maintaining the actual tunnels. When those 4 hours will take place, unsure, doesn't say. Probably between, I'd imagine, between, say, 11:30 and 3:30 in the morning. Population of Baltimore, Washington area is projected to increase 38% by 2040. That area, or that urban conglomeration, is already very densely populated anyway. So the fact that it's going to increase by 38% shows you there's going to be massive traffic congestion in that area over the next 10 to 20 years. I know I've already said this, but vast majority of this document is just garbage, red tape and job-killing regulations. The fact that you have to consider all these different things, it becomes so much, work to show that you're trying to tick all these boxes that it just adds months to, I bet this document could have been completed 3 or 4 months ago if they hadn't had all this stuff that they had to put in. Boeing Co would construct arterial tunnels, loop stations and ventilation shafts concurrently. So basically they had to have various project teams, maybe even different contractors. And maybe you'd have a set of contractors who would have 4 teams, and those 4 teams would construct the launch pits. Then you'd have a separate contractor that was doing the actual tunneling, and then you may have another contractor who's broken down into maybe let's say 50 teams who are constructing all the ventilation shafts, and they're going around building them all like every couple of weeks. It's very interesting to actually see them write that there. 4 TBM launch shafts will be built on private land that is owned or leased by the Boeing company. Plans stipulate the launch of 8 to 16 TBMs. If they did 16 TBMs, and this is quite a big issue, they would then have to extract the cutter head from the ventilation shafts, because what they would be doing is you'd have 2 TBMs essentially working their way towards each other, and then they would diverge and they would meet at the actual ventilation shaft, at which point both cutter heads would be removed and then the machines would be taken apart and disassembled. So I'm unsure about that, but it might be better just to do a TBM from one launch pit to another launch pit, and then it's a lot less work trying to extract that cutter head. Side tunnels between TBM board tunnels will be constructed either using pipe jacking or sequential excavation method. Sequential excavation method, from what I've read about it and basically my experience, is it's going to take a lot longer to use that particular method. To build side tunnels, it might be easier to use pipe jacking, and as you know, I do like pipe jacking. Boeing Co will use earth pressure balanced tunnel boring machines, which we kind of thought all along, but it kind of just confirms it there. All TBMs would aim to achieve an average boring rate, and this is one of the revelations of this document, a boring rate of 240 foot per day, which is not bad, which is around, in fact it is exactly 12 foot per hour if they're operating 24 hours a day, although it might be that they do 24 foot in this hour and then they have an hour where they're basically loading up the machine and removing the spoil. So it will average 240 foot per day, which is not bad going, really, not bad at all. Grant will be, and that's probably an underestimate of what they actually think they can achieve. I think they're kind of sandbagging that number. I think it'll be more nearer to 300, maybe even 350. Grout will be injected through a fill port to seal the annular space behind the segment, and obviously they're going underneath the motorway. What you want to do is seal that space so that you don't get any subsidence in the land above the tunnel. The Boring Company anticipates 20 ventilation shafts are necessary, although up to 70 are needed to allow appropriate emergency egress. The actual shafts will be 12 to 24 foot in diameter. Spurs linking the ventilation shafts to the main tunnel will be constructed via pipe jacking, and obviously the sequential the excavation method. Loop stations, they actually give a firm dimension on the actual size of the loop stations, and they said it's going to be 45 foot wide by 100 foot long, and I think it was also 45 foot deep. Maintenance terminals to be used for vehicle storage, repair and charging. So the actual TBM launch pits would be turned into these maintenance terminals. They actually build 2 separate floors, and then they'd have all the equipment and all the storage area built into that space. So maintenance terminals to be used for vehicle storage, repair and charging, and covered with a structural concrete decking mounted on top of steel beams, also known as concrete planks. We like to call them concrete planks here in the UK, but it's basically the same thing. Documents specify a 230 ton crawler crane for installing and removing any cutter heads, which seems reasonable. I would imagine that getting one of those might be a little bit tricky, but it's doable. There won't be that many, I'd imagine. But then again, it is the USA. There might be tons of them. I imagine the UK would be difficult to get one of that particular size. Conceptual rendering of maintenance terminal is on page 54. We'll have a look at that in a minute. Temporary prisms will be installed along the main arterial tunnel alignment to measure any surface settlement that occurs. So these prisms will be mounted, say, every 10 foot or so. And then you'll have a system that is mounted on top of either a lamppost or maybe on the side of a building, and it'll be shooting out its measurements to that particular prism every like 5 or 6 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, and then obviously it'll, if there's any kind of movement, even if it's a millimetre, it'll notice it and it'll be able to notify the people running the project. If the movement is more than, say, 5 or 6 millimeters over a short period of time, say 10 minutes, it will immediately notify everyone involved in the project and instruct the TBM to stop work, which is the common sense thing to do, because obviously something has gone badly wrong. Potentially they've hit an area of land that is full of voids, or potentially has been fractured, or maybe they've hit an area where the water table is higher than in the rest of the route, and thus something has gone badly wrong, and obviously they need to stop the TBM and rectify that as soon as possible. The TBM expects, this is quite an important fact, 97 trucks per day will be required to transport excavated soil from each shaft. 97 trucks per day is a lot of trucks, so we're talking big diesel trucks. And they actually put a plan in the environmental draft report, and some of these routes are quite considerable for the actual trucks to dispose of this spoil. So the actual carbon footprint of these trucks operating every day for 12 to 24 months is going to be quite considerable. That is potentially an issue, and they need to think about how they can minimise the carbon emissions from those trucks. Maybe use electric trucks. Maybe they could use the local sort of railway or something to transport the spoil. It doesn't look like it on the plans, but 97 trucks is a lot of CO2. That's going to upset the people that are, you know, approving this or potentially could approve this, and they might, on that basis, have some reservations in terms of, is this going to be good for people if it's pumping CO2 into the atmosphere every day for 12 months? Well, obviously not. It's dangerous. But looking on the flip side, once this project is completed, the actual AEVs are going to cut the amount of CO2 being produced in the area quite considerably. So it's got its pros and cons, swings and roundabouts. Ridership of AEVs would be controlled using an online reservation system, allowing passengers to book seats in an AEV at a given departure time. So a bit like a train. You'd obviously do it via a Boring Company app. You get on there, say I want to catch an AEV at 8:10. You get to the actual loop station. Slightly before that, you get into the AEV, and then it takes you there, and it obviously then bills you. And the actual phone would be the ticket. So I've got here 4 to 8 trucks per hour would be needed at each TBM launch shaft to move excavated soil. That's per day, isn't it? 97 trucks per day. 4 to 8 trucks per hour. So yeah, that sounds about right. The Boring Company assumes some 2 million cubic yards of soil would be excavated during construction. That is insane amounts of spoil that is going to have to be taken somewhere. They do mention in the document about potentially turning this into bricks, but at the moment they're just assuming that it's going to be taken to landfill. That is an immense amount of spoil. We're talking like a huge mountain full of soil. If they could turn that into bricks, obviously they can then turn that into some money, which will help them fund the project and keep costs down. That needs to be, you know, really looked at in depth about how they're going to set up that system of converting all that spoil into bricks on the same day that the spoil arrives to the actual site. Excavation of TBM launch shafts will take approximately 1 month. Sounds about right. Might be able to get that below a month, I'd imagine. Excavated soil to be stored on site temporarily, and haul trips scheduled for set times. So I'd imagine they'd want to keep the spoil on site between, say, 7 AM and 10 AM, and then they would want to do a load of trips before 3 PM, and then 3 PM till 7:30 PM. They'd want to again store it on site and try and minimise the amount of trucks that are going into rush hour traffic. The implementation of a traffic management plan would help to minimise temporary traffic delays on roadways adjacent to loop station construction sites. Traffic management plans are very important. They often put stipulations on the contractor. The contractor needs to follow that very, very diligently. Otherwise, they'll end up in a lot of hot water. They are there to help you. They're there to help the residents that live in that local area and to minimise disruption. They're a good thing as long as they're not too restrictive. You need to follow them diligently, because I know for a fact that people that don't follow traffic plans diligently get in trouble with the regulators, and then it ultimately leads to fines, certainly in the UK anyway. The last 230 pages are utter waste of ink. I did actually read them, and it was just a case of them copying things and pasting it in from various other regulatory documents, and it is to do with like kind of where local like waterways are, and buildings that are architecturally what would you call it, important, or like listed buildings, potential animal species or fowl that might be near the site, potential woodlands and that sort of thing. And it's all, you know, fair enough, but there's so many stipulations, and really in the grand scheme of things it's not really going to affect the environment that much, because 97% of the construction is underground, which is hence why we're doing this. Imagine the disruption that it caused when they built that motorway there at the 295. Immense disruption, yet this is taking up 1/100th of the land, yet we've got to do this incredibly wasteful document. So where should we start? Page 52. Page 52. So we've got our rendering of the conceptual ventilation shaft. This potentially will be built using pipe jacking. Up to 70 of these on the project. Very important that they ventilate this space correctly. Even though there's not internal combustion engines in that tube, you might still get the build-up of carbon dioxide, and there might be a shortage of oxygen, so you need to make sure that there's plenty of changes. Here is our loop station conceptual rendering. So we've got the option of a ramp, or the option of this, which is kind of like an underground station, really. The interesting part, I'd say, about this is they've got the vehicle stored on the surface. People come down via the escalator. I presume there's one on the other side. They don't show it, but obviously they have to do this cutaway here. These elevators are above the actual roadway, which what would happen if you had to extend this? You may have to pull a tunnel out here at a 45-degree angle. We've got some prisms. If we go further down, oh, here we are. Conceptual rendering of a maintenance terminal. So the actual TBM launch shafts, they're proposing 4. Potentially they might use 5, but it's unlikely. They have proposed this launch pit E, but it's likely there'll be 4 of these, and these will be converted into these maintenance terminals or maintenance yards. So the vehicles will come up the AV, and then you have your charge stations here. These kind of like purple units, which is interesting. I'm wondering how many vehicles you could charge there, whether it would be enough. We'd have to see. I'd imagine these would be superchargers, and they'd be able to charge the vehicle in under like 20 minutes to half an hour. What else was there? Here is, so in black here, if I just zoom out a bit, is the actual route itself. So here's Baltimore going down to Washington DC here, and these areas in green are the proposed haul routes for the actual trucks that will be needed to remove the spoil from the TBM launch pits. As you can see, these are long routes. I mean, look at this one from launch shaft C. That's got to be nearly 18 miles, maybe a bit longer. That is a lot of diesel that's going to be burned doing that. 57, there it is, 57, sorry, I've forgotten this. So, these are prisms. These will be mounted on the road, and they will help identify if any settlement is taking place. I can't remember if it says how often they will be placed. I'd imagine it'd be every sort of 8 to 10 foot, maybe slightly more than that. And then you'd have a pole, and on top of that you'd have your equipment that actually measures the distance between the receiver and this prism. 67 and 68. So here's the overview of where the actual Baltimore Loop station is going to be located. There's the baseball stadium. Really beautiful that. There's like a car park here. Then here's the football stadium. So we're right in between the two, which is just perfect. And then we have our spot in Washington. Spot in Washington is a confined site. It is a confined site, as you can see, along New York Avenue. That is going to be difficult. It's doable. It's going to be difficult. Getting trucks in and out of there is going to be an issue. Going to have issues with neighbours as well, I think, because of all the noise and all the disruption of bringing the equipment into here. But it's doable. I expect that job to cost a lot of money because of its location and the actual size of the site and what we're doing there. Finally, 424. Go to 424. Save the best to last. It gives us some data. And I always like a bit of data. A lot of these are all projects assumptions, because so obviously they could be changing. Like the tunnel diameter, 14 foot, and it tells you about all the dirt that they're going to be removing, trucking. So volume of dirt that they will remove per truck is 15 cubic yards. So we use cubic meters here in the UK, but a yard and a meter is not a million miles apart. Total number of dump trucks required, 141,687. Total haul trucks per day, 389. Let's have a number of ventilation shafts. Number of shafts, 70. Shaft diameter, so you've put down here potentially 2 different ones. So let's have a look at 24 foot, as that's the worst case scenario. Cross-sectional area is 452 square meters. Shaft depth 60 feet. Volume excavated per shaft is incredible, 27,143 cubic feet. So it's interesting that there's incredible amounts of spoil to be removed from these sites. It's going to be a logistical nightmare trying to ensure that you're constantly removing that from the TBM, getting it to the surface and then getting it on trucks, because inevitably what's going to be happening is you're going to be removing the spoil from the TBM. The TBM is going to be pumping it out, and then you've not got enough trucks at the surface, or you can't use the trucks because it's rush hour. So then you may have to halt the TBM for a short period of time. Let's just look at this one before we go. So we've got TBM launch shaft and the loop stations. I thought it was 100 foot. I'm sure I read it was 100 foot. Anyway, shaft width 30 foot, shaft depth 60 foot. Volume excavated per shaft 144,000 cubic feet. Volume excavated per shaft 5,333 cubic yards. Total volume. Let's have a look at our TBM launch shaft. Shaft length 180 foot. Shaft width 50 foot. Shaft depth 40 foot. Volume excavated per shaft is 360,000 cubic feet, which is actually more than the loop station, interestingly enough. Volume excavated per shaft 13,000 cubic yards. Total volume 53,000 cubic yards. So again, quite a lot. And it tells you about all the equipment they're going to be using on the site as well. A Tesla supercharger, I just noticed that there. Ventilation fan, that'll be for the ventilation shafts. Anyway, so that is that, guys. A lot of interesting information on or in that particular document. If I was going to summarize this in a quick paragraph, I'd say very bullish on this project. I think it's going to happen now. I must admit, I got it wrong. I kind of doubted this project was going to happen. I kind of doubted it was going to go through the planning process. I thought it was maybe going to be stopped before it even went through planning, but it appears it is doing. I believe they've got the answers for all these problems that are outlined in this environmental assessment. They can be easily fixed. Maybe even the trucking could be converted to electric or some other form of fuel like natural gas potentially, which produces less emissions. We don't like diesel trucks. They're not good for the environment. This is a big job. It's around 36 miles. A lot of tunnelling to be completed. got 4 launch pits, we've got 2 stations, we've got 70 ventilation shafts. That is some serious work. It could end up costing $1 billion, maybe slightly more. This is a big job. However, the potential for this to change the landscape in Washington DC and Baltimore is immense. To begin with, it'll only allow, I don't know if it's 1,000 people or 1,000 vehicles per day. I'm going to have to look into that, guys. I think it's 1,000 vehicles per day. That's what I'm going to say, guys. 1,000 vehicle journeys per day. However, it can be extended up to 100,000 vehicle journeys per day, and that's what it says in this document, if they add micro stations along the route. I think that they will apply for that once this project is either near completion or it has been completed. At that point, this then becomes kind of a marquee project that really sells the Boring Company for what it can do. If they can get Linestorm working flat out on this project, so obviously they'll need around 8 TBMs, so they'll need 8 Linestorms or 4 Linestorms and 4 proof rocks. Who knows? It'll probably be Linestorm, to be fair with you. At that point, if we can do this, if we can do the whole project in 16, 17, 18 months, if we can do it in under 18 months, that will be incredible for first attempt at a project of this scale by essentially a startup, the Boring Company, at which point I expect things to just blow up. Huge blow up. People on the phone asking the Boring Company, Elon Musk, if you can do this project, if you can do that project, if you can help us do this, if you can help us build this sewer, if you can help us build a water connection to this reservoir. It will open the doors for tons of money, hopefully lots more projects, and the ultimate success of the Boring Company and this channel as well. If you enjoyed the theme of today's talk, get on Discord. Please come and join me on Discord. I'll personally say hello to you and answer any questions that you want. Today, if you get on today, I'll answer any question you wish me to ask. You get 1 question. Link is in the description below. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it. Thank you to all my Patreons. Remember, guys, don't be boring. Stay tuned for a new episode, possibly tomorrow or the day after. Thank you and goodbye. See you later.